Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third season of the Middle East Librarians Association Social Justice Lecture Series. My name is Denise Sufi. I am the metadata librarian for Middle Eastern languages at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a member of the Social Justice Committee. Today, I will be your host. I'd like to thank the committee for helping me organize this event and the rest of the series. Thanks also to Harvard University for providing the Zoom access, and to everyone who donated to our fundraising campaign so that we could offer honorariums to all of our speakers. Just a quick reminder that we have not yet met our goal for this season. So if you have anything to spare to support our series, the link is in the chat. This lecture series, hosted by the Middle East Librarians Association Social Justice Committee, aims to increase awareness of social justice principles in our professional practice, as well as to bring attention to how libraries and archives are supporting or failing to support crucial research on issues related to social justice. For this third season of the Social Justice Lecture Series, which we have entitled Lives in the Margins, Ethnic and Religious Minorities in the Middle East, we seek to combine and expand the themes of the previous seasons. We are inviting scholars researching minority groups to speak about the questions they are attempting to answer and the barriers they face accessing resources. And we are also hosting information professionals to reflect on whose heritage is being preserved and how and why or why not. Now, on to the main event. Today, we are honored to welcome Rustin Zarkar and Waleed Ziad, co-investigators for the Endangered archives from Sufi shrines of the Afghan-Pakistan Frontier Digitization Initiative, funded by UCLA Libraries' Modern Endangered Archives Project. Rustin Zarkar is the former Middle East and Islamic Studies librarian at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and the incoming field director of the Library of Congress Cairo Overseas Office. He is also a PhD candidate in Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at New York University, where he is completing his doctoral research on the mobility and the history of imperial state formation in the Caspian Sea region. Waleed Ziad is Assistant Professor and Ali Jarrahi Fellow in Persian Studies in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Prior to this, he was an Islamic Law and Civilization Research Fellow at Yale Law School. In the last decade, Ziad has conducted fieldwork on historical and contemporary religious revivalism and Sufism in over 140 towns across Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Pakistan. His recent book, Hidden Caliphate, Sufi Saints Beyond the Oxus and Indus, Harvard 2021, won the Albert Hourani Book Award. We're so glad to have both of you here with us. So without further ado, we hope everyone enjoys today's lecture, Post-custodial Archives from Sufi Shrines of the Afghan-Pakistan Frontier. Mr. Zarkar and Dr. Ziad, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Denise, for that wonderful introduction and for the MELA Social Justice Committee and the lecture series for hosting us. I believe that this is one of the, as a member of MELA, I can say this is one of the most exciting and important lecture series that MELA does. I think that the number of participants over the course of the last years that this project has been going on shows that people are incredibly interested in the work that you're all doing, and honestly, we're just so honored and humbled to be able to participate in this lecture series. So I will go ahead and share my screen, and then I will pass it off to my colleague Waleed Ziad after I do a quick introduction as to the project, but more specifically UCLA's Modern Endangered Archives program. So here we go. And I can get started right now. So that should be working. Great. So as Denise has kindly said, the name of our project is the Endangered Archives from Sufi Shrines of the Afghan-Pakistan Border Digitization Initiative, and it is funded by the UCLA Libraries Modern Endangered Archives program. For those of you who are not yet familiar with MEAP, it is a fantastic initiative that is based at UCLA, and the aims are to digitize and make accessible endangered archive materials from the 20th and the 21st centuries, including print, photographic, film, audio, ephemeral, and born digital materials. If you are interested, we are more than happy to talk to you a little bit more if you have any endangered archives projects you're considering. But the project itself, MEAP, they have a fantastic team that does a lot of fascinating sort of work. They fund a lot of projects, but they also do a lot of introductional and informational sessions for you to build a project. So we've had a really great sort of back and forth, even before we were granted the award, to kind of hone in the project and to think a little bit about what's feasible and what's not. And part of that is kind of deciding what sorts of projects you would like to do. So they offer 2 grants. One is a planning grant for $15,000 for a 1-year survey of collections that will be digitized in the future. And the second is a project grant that is up to $50,000 for actual digitization work. And so we're a part of the 3rd-year cohort, and we are one of the 29 projects that were funded. So that is what I will just give you in terms of a short introduction for MEAP and the great work that they're doing. And I will pass it to my colleague, Dr. Ziad, to kind of speak a little bit more about the background and the history of how this project came to be.
All right, Rustin, thank you so much. And deeply grateful. I'm going to second what Rustin said to the MELA SJC team. To be invited here. In fact, very much looking forward to feedback as well. I also want to second Rustin's point that MEAP has actually been a joy to work with, and it's quite refreshing to have a team on the other end which understands the kind of flexibility we need and is constantly in communication with us to kind of better address the sorts of challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how this all came about. A little bit about, in fact, I'll probably take it up to the level where Rustin then entered into the picture and then the project actually began. So for about a decade or decade and a half, I have focused a lot of my research on Sufi networks, so Muslim mystic networks and academic networks, scholastic networks, from about the 18th century to the present, centered in what I would call Greater Afghanistan. So what comprises today's Afghanistan and Northwest Pakistan. Cities like Peshawar near the on the Pakistan side of the Afghan-Pakistan border, Kabul, Kandahar. And through the course of my work, I basically have been fortunate to be able to trace significant scholastic networks that are going from these cities all the way to Siberia, to well into Xinjiang in China, up to the Volga, and really all the way to Bengal. So, the work traces cultural, literary, philosophical exchange, and then also recognizes towns in Greater Afghanistan as historical cosmopolitan centers. So repositioning this whole region as a crossroads rather than the perennial frontier, which is how it's generally billed in fact, colonial imagination and really up to date. So if you were to ask me why I believe that this work matters, it would, at first, of course, I would say from an academic vantage point, there has been very little emphasis that has been put on this area, especially on local sources. But at a more personal level, and I think I would also speak for all of our phenomenal team members who are working with us, it is critical, especially at this time, to help recover and rebuild local narratives. In fact, it's long overdue. This whole region, Afghanistan, Northwest Pakistan, and especially the border regions, the Durand Line, are treated and have been treated as security problems. To be managed or to be mismanaged. The ideas that's floating around of this region being the graveyard of empires, somehow, this region of sort of noble savages that are able to kind of, knock out empires and kind of, living according to some bizarre sort of rules of outdated rules of chivalric conduct. So 100 years ago, when it came to academic work on the border, on this Afghan-Pakistan border, the core questions were, how do we manage the frontier of British rule, which is what this line represented. Naturally, of course, what lay beyond the frontier was ideas of kind of this netherworld of other sort of the Pashtun other living in this netherworld. And I wish I could say that that approach to this region were something of the past, because now virtually all the material that's coming out is obsession with the Taliban. In fact, this whole region is painted according to that particular framework. So in painting this region as a civilizational backwater, we come across a lot of very problematic racialized notions of Pashtuns and other groups that are living there. The idea of barbaric races prone to fundamentalism with a kind of two-dimensional view of faith. From the 1800s onwards, we've got notions of the bloodthirsty Pashtun or Afghan living in this ungovernable, uncontrollable, intractable, uneducated, and again, many of these notions are sort of worked their way into policy discourses today. For some odd reason, this region was just simply never affected by the post-colonial turn. It's as if it sort of like took a turn and missed the whole region. Kipling's poem "East is East, West is West" was very much about the encounter of the British soldier with the Pashtun soldier, and again, challenge you to open up sort of, I would say, 98% of works that deal with this region. You're going to find the same tropes that repeat themselves over and over again. The archives for these border regions, and again, I hesitate to even call them border regions, because in the work that I do, these are passageways, right? The border is, of course, a very kind of unnatural construct coming out of the Great Game. So the archives are generally weighted towards security concerns, and as a result, you have very few sources that are coming from the inside. And they start appearing in about the 1950s or so, but they appear in the form of like deeply problematic ethnographic works, generally about Pashtun tribalism and so on and so forth. So in a sense, these narratives generate a reality, right? So when you've got 200 years of treating a region like a problem, the region becomes a problem. And of course, the people within end up absorbing narratives about who they actually are and about the nature of their race or the martial race that they belong to. Over the last few years, I've been traveling across this whole zone in Central and South Asia, a lot in Afghanistan and Northwest Pakistan, really looking for sources produced by Sufi networks, by intellectual and mystical networks. And I focus on these partly because these centers, this is a region which was deeply infused with Sufi ideals. And the Sufi centers were centers for cultural and political life, for literary production. I do a lot of work on the border regions. And again, one of my preferences is to actually look at archival materials in their natural habitat. As I'm sure Rustin will talk about soon, the extractive colonial archival practices simply don't give us a sense of how materials were used, how they circulated, how they were produced, or how they were venerated. So in this course of last few years, been able to come across a lot of new materials that have generated two books, one which is coming up on female saints and female religious leaders in the late 18th and 19th centuries across greater Afghanistan, and then this book here, Hidden Caliphate. And it's Hidden Caliphate that actually, the research behind it that then spurred the archival project. So in Hidden Caliphate, I trace a vast network of scholars and saints that are based out of the city of Peshawar. And this network, I would argue, in many ways held South and Central Asia and the broader Persianate world together in the early modern period, whether through spiritual leadership, through academic production, education, diplomacy, social mobilization, even war mobilization. Now, the processes of colonialism, of British and Russian colonialism, end up actually breaking these networks apart. And part of it is the great game of kind of delineating regions within the Russian and British sphere of influence. And then they were also deliberately broken because they were alternative loci of power and authority that were obviously a threat to the nascent colonial states. Rustin, can I jump over to the next slide, please? Now, it turns out that the last living lineage of the Sufi order that I traced in Hidden Caliphate was in the most unlikely place, a region called North Waziristan, which is right along the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and which was very problematically referred to by President Barack Obama as the most dangerous place on earth. Most people who know it as the epicenter of the great Afghan wars of the last 45 years. It's painted as a no man's land, a kind of at the interstices of civilization, the last sort of ungovernable zone of the great game, this kind of like sliver of a zone. Waziristan has only been represented through the security lens as a place of extremism. I believe not a single study has actually used internal sources. All the resources from the colonial period onwards are generally gazetteers, intelligence reports, and that really continues on after the creation of the Afghan and later the post-1947, the creation of Pakistan. So the last great saint of this network was this gentleman who we're actually seeing to the left here, who was Abdullah Jan Farooqi, who was a scholar saint in the North Waziristan and all across the border from about 1950 all the way to about 2006. And he lived and worked through the great crises of the age and was undoubtedly the most well-respected and beloved scholar saint on both sides of the border. He had hundreds of thousands of disciples. He was called in to end and negotiate the end of conflicts and wars. He was a major activist against Wahhabi ideology and against the militancy that was creeping into this region in the 1980s and 1990s. He ran publishing houses in Waziristan and several other regions adjacent to that in 4 languages. So Pashto, Urdu, Arabic, Persian, on poetry, metaphysics, spiritual practices, history, so on and so forth. And it's his archival archives and private papers and his network at large across both sides of the border that are the core of the project that Rustin and I are working on. So I'll tell you how I ran across this, this treasure trove. Can I shall move to the next slide, please? So about 7 years ago, I was doing some field work in Peshawar for the book, and I was based at this shrine that you see to the right, which is of a scholar saint of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, who is the protagonist of my last book. So I was documenting the shrine. Next slide, please. And in the process, discovered several original tombstones from the late 18th century, as well as a lot of the modern artwork that you can see in this picture in front of you. So as I was rummaging through the storerooms, the caretaker of the shrine actually brought to my attention a little stack of books that were published quite recently, I think in the last 20 years or so, by the descendants and followers of this great saint of Peshawar. And it struck me as fascinating that they were published in North Waziristan and Malaka, the Malakan, the agency, which is north of Peshawar, which at that stage had just been wrested out of the control of the Pakistan Taliban. Similar to Waziristan, it's a region that has been, it's known more for, again, in fact, Churchill fought his first campaign as the Malakan expedition there. And few realize that it's also the birthplace of Padmasambhava, who is probably the most important figure in Buddhism after Lord Buddha. So at that stage, North Waziristan was, I think, inaccessible even to the respective armies of Pakistan and Afghanistan, but Malakand had just recently started calming down. So there was a phone number on the back of these little books that I found, and I called the phone number in Malakand. And then, can I trouble you for the next slide, please? And then the next day, I arrived in Malakand unannounced. And lo and behold, at this in this town called Thana, these two gentlemen were waiting for me on a street corner, and they were the descendants of this great saint, in fact, the saint of Waziristan, as well as the one whose shrine you just saw in Peshawar. And they themselves also ran a publishing house and were very interested in preserving and collecting together the material of theirs and other Sufi and scholarly traditions in northwestern Pakistan and the Kabul Valley. So that night they put at my disposal about, I think, 30 manuscripts in their collection and whatever published works they had. And I remember spending the whole night, about 8 hours, just frantically taking photographs of all the material. So, as our friendship became stronger and stronger, then we together would travel from village to village and try to track down a lot of works that had been distributed or lost at various stages over the last 200 years. I remember in one nearby village finding a really extraordinary text on licit magic, which I think Rustin will share in a little while. So, as the work continued over the next couple of years, the family and broader networks also started reaching out and expanding their network, other scholars and Sufis who were interested in gathering material together. So I asked our friend Wahidullah Jan Farooqi, who is from Thana and the Malakand Agency, about the materials in Waziristan. Because this would be materials that have never actually seen the light of day, and certainly would immediately tell an alternative story of the region that has been represented in very problematic ways in the last couple of hundred years. So at first, they weren't able to track anything down, and then I remember about 3.5 years ago, as they were expanding their own network and then spending more time in Waziristan, more and more material started emerging, and they started taking pictures on their cell phones. And Rustin, you'll probably recall, every week there was a new document that was being sent my way. And it became very evident that there was just a whole treasure trove that was sitting there. So, I remember there were personal diaries, there were letters, there were a whole sequence of unpublished epistles that the saint wrote to his disciples, which in fact included female disciples. There were articles on his political involvement at various moments from between 1950 to the early 2000s. So, I think it's at this stage that I had come to approach Rustin and mention to him that there is all of this material, and that there is a growing body of people who are interested in doing something with it and making it accessible. In the process, I was also taken to a Sufi center in Peshawar, which actually hosts one of the, in fact, probably the largest private library dealing sort of scholarly and Sufi library within the city of Peshawar. And the institution was founded about 300 or 350 years ago. We were very fortunate that the library was compiled and partially cataloged 2 generations ago by a Sufi who also had written several works on the great sort of scholarly networks of the Peshawar Valley. He himself, I think about maybe 15 works that he had put together. And he had, I think the collection that he had managed to centralize was several thousand rare published works, and then probably about 500 to 600 manuscripts. The librarians there were absolutely phenomenal. And it turns out that this institution was also a hub for a lot of other Sufi and scholarly networks on both sides of the border to kind of gather and share information. And then the librarian became very interested in working with me on a future project, and it also sort of put this this little sort of whispered in my ear that he may be interested in doing something that could help kind of take this library to the next level and make the materials accessible, and then also encourage others to follow suit, to share their materials. So I think it's at this stage that I had talked to Rustin, and then Rustin had this phenomenal idea that we should put together a project with MEAP, and then I think that is where our discussions began. So Rustin, should I hand it over to you?
Great. Thank you so much, Waleed. Yeah, so I'm happy to kind of explore some of the work that we actually did as part of the MEAP project. And as part of that, I can tell you about some of the sorts of challenges, obstacles, but amazing things that came along the way as we were thinking about putting together the project and how we would spend the funds. So ultimately, after a few rewrites and a few sort of discussions with the MEAP team, we decided that for the 2-year project, for the $50,000, we would focus our energy on cataloging and digitizing the archives of 4 Sufi monasteries affiliated with 2 of the networks that Waleed had mentioned. One was obviously the network of the Naqshbandi Mujaddidis that we refer to as being based in North Waziristan, and the second was the Qadiri order of the Amir Shah Qadiri library, where Waleed had mentioned the librarians with the 6,000 items had approached Waleed beforehand. So with that, we were able to kind of do an intermediary or an elementary sort of survey where with the help of our interlocutors on the ground, and we were able to, kind of get a sense of what materials there are. So there's Persian, Pashto, Arabic, and Urdu materials ranging from, as Waleed mentioned, biographies, letters, texts on jurisprudence, metaphysics, things on the occult, the illicit sciences, poetry, and a huge amount of ephemera. So these ephemera also included, they really spoke to sort of the activities of these khanaqahs and these orders during the rise of these sort of tumultuous periods in the 70s and 80s, specifically targeting targeting extremism. So they would be publishing sort of refutations of fundamentalism. They would publish anti-extremist posters, audio recordings. They would, take of Sufi masters who would be talking about their history against the Taliban. And obviously, as Waleed mentioned, the material culture of funerary engraving and shrine art. So all in all, we realized 8,000 items have been identified for digitization in one shape or another. And that's really a monumental task. But we figured, within 2 years and within a big enough team, we could get a sense of how much we could do within that time span. So as Waleed mentioned, the context of necessity in relation to the materials themselves, right? So I can focus specifically on the state of the materials. So obviously some shrines had slightly better maintained materials than others, right? So I would say the Amir Shah Qadiri Library had already conducted some cataloging work and had an internal system in place, which became very easy for us to work with our partners from the library there. But some of the other materials were kind of dispersed through local networks as part of a chain of people moving to different areas, taking materials from one place to another in somebody's house, in some disciple's house. So there was this network dispersion where a lot of materials had been kind of spread out. And one of our missions was to try to recollate this material. Obviously, in addition, what also made it endangered was the issue of looting and iconoclasm, that when some of these shrines were attacked by sort of more fundamentalist forces, they would engage in destruction of funerary art or the destruction of papers. So there was also this need for digitization that our counterparts from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa noted that this is one of the reasons why this work needs to be done. And I would also say issues of storage and just maintaining and conservation was another category of concerns that our counterparts had on the ground. So I will just mention that here are the 4 sites that we had decided to work on from the 2 different networks. So Tana, as Waleed mentioned, Wana, Bannu, and Peshawar. So we worked primarily out of Peshawar and Tana, and as part of our mission to collate this material, some of the items that were in more difficult places for me in particular to travel to were brought to these areas and sort of recollated into their collection. So part of how we approached this project was through a post-custodial model of archiving and of archival practice. So for those of you who are not, I'm sure this is a very big turn in library sciences, but for those of you who are not librarians or archivists, I can give a little bit of information, but it is the practice of using digital technology to have a more collaborative approach to archival work. And really, it's about, at least in sort of the articulation that we used, it was a way to kind of shift the balance of power in archival preservation away from some of the more extractive and colonial methods of, bringing $100,000 to a region, buying up every manuscript we saw, bringing it back to a research library in the US and digitizing things on site. It really was, in this model, it's about equipping people that already have the technical and general and local knowledge of these materials and are custodians of these materials, equipping them with the right technologies for them, and also to provide training for them to extend the length of the biographies of these objects. So to digitize the materials themselves, to create metadata. So this has been very much a way that we are just providing the basic items of equipment, digitization, and the training of these equipment for custodians of the materials themselves to be able to conduct this work. So even if this 2-year project runs out, those people who are affiliated with these shrines have the technical know-how and have the equipment to continue the work. And that's really the model that we thought would work best for this project. So I can share with you some of the ways that we were able to do this. So here we can see that we had a few different members from both Peshawar and Tana who were able to join us with training. So you can see that, there's a few cables here and there, and a bit, it could have been a little bit more formalized, but this is really for us to get a sense of how to digitize things as efficiently and as standardized as possible. And that took a few weeks. So Waleed and I were there for about 6 weeks, working specifically on training, on data management, on metadata creation with our counterparts there. And part of it was really figuring out, issues of, how to hold down the book. Are we using a pane of glass? Well, how do we then remove the glare from the camera? Oh, maybe we should put up a black screen. Oh, okay, well, how do we then deal with standard lighting? Should we use natural light? Oh, if we use natural light, we're going to have to shift throughout the day. Oh, should we bring in light boxes? Well, if you use light boxes, what happens during power outages? So all of these sorts of questions continue to pile up. And it really took us a few weeks just to be able to get a system that could produce standard images throughout the course of the several weeks. And really, our plan there was just to make sure that as Waleed and I were able to leave, that everybody on the ground there had the knowledge and equipment necessary to continue the work for as long as they see fit. So I can just say that as part of this initial run, here's an example of some of the material we were able to get and how it looks, right? So first this is a post-processed image of the title page for one of the books that we were able to find in the Amir Shah Qadri library. So you can see our file name here. We use a standard template that was given to us by MEAP for kind of finding the name of the project, the location, Peshawar and Amir Shah Qadri, and then for the manuscript itself, we used the local IDs that were used by the Amir Shah Qadri library 2 generations ago. And so we, in our metadata creation, are creating both Urdu and English translations of the metadata with abstracts. So it is not just accessible to scholars here in the US, but also to scholars and custodians of the materials in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So really, one of the things that we are hoping to do is once we create the digital assets and deliver them to UCLA, we are also having the partners of the custodians they will maintain the access as well. We will be helping them to create a online web portal for the exhibition and the storage of this material as well. And this will be something that, yes, ultimately the people who have the highest stakes in preserving and working with this material have access to it. And I think that that's one of our major keys for 2023 is to really work with our colleagues there to make sure that a website is able to meet their needs as well. So
Rustin, can I kick in with regards
yes.
to some of the outputs here, although this may be something that you're talking about, but the partners on the ground, in fact, I would say the ones who are really doing all of the heavy lifting right now, have just, it's been absolutely amazing. The librarian at the Amir Shah Qadri Library, I think very soon after we left, started a WhatsApp group in which she started bringing together basically Sufis and scholars and owners of sort of the custodians of various Sufi collections all across the border regions. And I think he, within about 2 weeks, had a community of about 170 people. And it's, I have to normally mute my WhatsApp because there's just so many messages sent back and forth of, new works that are found in various areas, custodians of collections that one has never heard of who want others to be aware of what they have. And I think this, like, bit by bit by bit, the understanding that this material is actually to be shared, and that there should be no hesitancy to put this out in the public.
Thank you for the context, Waleed. Yes, I think that one of the amazing sort of unintended results of this sort of work was really the building of this network of people that we had not really been in contact with previously, who found us or we were put in contact with, who are sharing materials that they had. So it's within their own networks, within the network that we had previously worked with, but really it is creating a opportunity for more digitization work to be done in the future independently without our involvement. And I think that's ultimately the key takeaway here, is that these fantastic colleagues of ours have the amazing work ethic and resources available to do this. And just to give you a sense that of some of the things that they're doing, we're receiving about 5,000 processed images a month, which is giving Waleed and I a lot of stress, because we're like, that's a lot of stuff we have to comb through and figure out how to make it fit the standards of both UCLA and UNC. But it really is an amazing amount of effort that our team is able to put together. And this is a team of about 14 people who are on the ground consistently working on digitizing, metadata creation, post-processing, and not just that, but also management of data. So having servers, working internet connection that can upload materials, storage, all the sort of things that Waleed and I maybe were afterthoughts or not thoughts at all when we first thought about the project. But really the sort of bulwark of our, of running into disasters is the team themselves on the ground there, who are really identifying problems and challenges and are able to use the resources available to them to continue the work. So I would say right now we have somewhere around 30 to 35,000 processed images. We have an initial metadata sheet that we're working on. We're hoping to create more complete descriptions by 2023. And in addition to the website that we're creating, which I think will eventually bring more people in to participate in the project and to create more needs for us to kind of continue digitization work, we're also able to do some collection development work for UNC Libraries. And so I want to thank my colleague Denise Sufi, who's on the call and introduced us, because we were able to bring about 400 monographs published in Pashto, Dari, Urdu, Hindko, and other local languages in Peshawar, and they were cataloged and integrated into our library at UNC. So I want to thank Denise for that. But basically, it gave us an opportunity to also see what is the publishing landscape now in the city. And so I will leave it there, because I know that we want to leave time for questions. But I would say that this is all to say that this project is very much still ongoing, and we are working with people, and we're always looking for more people. If anybody knows any people in the area who are interested in digitization or in preservation of their materials, please let us know. And yeah, I don't know, Waleed, if you had any more comments before we end.
I mean, it's I guess several things I could say, but well, one of the areas that I think I was really happy with was the way in which this project had allowed ourselves and our partners to solidify networks that are already on the ground. And I recall, for example, working in Thana or in Peshawar, and I should be headed off to Waziristan soon. I'm hoping something similar will happen, but just the ability to of our partners to immediately be able to sort of call on people. X is actually has some knowledge of some tech knowledge that we require. Someone else is a camera technician. Someone else is a good source, like let's say in the Malakan agency, for camera parts that would otherwise be almost impossible to find. Such and such person 15 years ago had created an Arabic catalog of certain manuscripts in the region, sort of bringing them on by. So it was just this constant, and really enriching, I would say, sort of a flow of people that were coming in and out of our workspace and introducing themselves to us, and we're introducing ourselves to them. And then so the team was about 14, 15, but the actual number of people who were taking part must have been about 30 plus, right, Rustin? Like some of the the scholars of Persian and Pashto and Arabic who are coming in and out, guiding us on the collections, how they were put together, where to go next for other parts of the collection, where to look for a lost library that was, I think everyone lost track of in about sort of circa 1820. So and I think the team is going to get larger and larger and larger. And it is also wonderful that you've got so many people from within these networks who are invested in now republishing material, digitizing material, understanding what kind of new technologies are available.
Wonderful. And I think with that, we will end our presentation, and we look forward to any questions that anyone in the audience may have. But thank you once again for letting us share the material with us. And please, any feedback, any ideas about how to make the project more efficient, or because obviously Waleed and I are not necessarily experts, but we're happy that we're surrounded by people with that are much more talented than us to conduct this work. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rustin and Waleed. Wonderful talk, absolutely wonderful. It's a great project that you're doing over there, and I think it's going to have a tremendous impact on both for the people there and as well as for scholarship in general. I don't see any questions yet, but we'll give people a moment. I do have one question that maybe I'll just start with that. It's not terribly profound, but I'm kind of curious about the range of the manuscript collections there, like kind of like the approximate percentages of the different languages and the subject matter. What's kind of the most common subject matter? Were the manuscripts all produced in the region, or some of them also, they've come from outside?
Rustin, should I begin, and then please?
Sure, I can add more after you. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, it's a great question. I think a big part of what we had to do there was to actually determine what material to prioritize, because there was just so much out there. So we can probably divide this like into two. So each of the Sufi centers had libraries of manuscripts that they had been collecting from generation to generation. And these are sort of, manuscripts that may be, as early as like whatever the 1400s all the way to, let's say, in the early 1900s, when there was still manuscript production going on in this region. The other side were, I think, productions within the networks themselves. And, we focused on a combination of the two, sort of looking at rare materials from their libraries and their collections. And then but we were far more interested in what these collections had to say about contemporary life in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. So in the case of, let's say, Abdullah Jan Farooqi, the Saint of North Waziristan, he led a rather phenomenal life, because in the early part of his career, I think in the 1930s, 1940s, he was part of the Pashtun movement that was led by someone who was known as the Frontier Gandhi. It was a nonviolent movement against sort of anti-colonial movement, led by Bacha Khan, in fact, he was a contemporary and close friend of Gandhi's as well. So, you end up with a lot of letters and articles that he had written to local papers. So it turns out that he actually, from the 30s, 40s onwards, was actually submitting articles. And the first and second drafts of those articles were sitting there in Malakand and Waziristan. So we had that sort of material. Epistles are key. I think there must have been about 500 epistles that we found that were written generally by him to various of his disciples and fellow Sufis on both sides of the border, as well as and they're also on mundane questions as well. Like if someone has a land dispute, and he's asked to sort of step in and help kind of ease any problems, then there may be a letter regarding the land dispute, or a letter regarding the building of a new mosque or a new Sufi center, where or in fact, there's a whole set of letters on meditative practices. In fact, it's a Muslim system of subtle bodies that are mapped onto the frame, almost like Tantric Buddhism. And he's sort of guiding people, guiding his disciples and others in in energizing these subtle centers and in journeying towards the divine. So you get a real kind of a range of this. And then when the 1980s kick in, and the Afghan war is starting, and this first time certain foreign ideologies start entering into the region. At that stage, he and his contemporaries start producing a lot of polemical works to sort of keep the substance of traditional life intact and Sufi life intact amidst this kind of onslaught that's coming with the Afghan war and so on and so forth. The material, so there's then poetry. There's a lot of poetry. So he's got Pashto poetry, he's got Urdu poetry. Occasionally, I do recall one anonymous manuscript of Pashto poetry that he had found in various pieces and copied out by hand and then had it republished. So, I mean, all this to say that these Sufi centers were absolutely the center of cultural life and social life. They were the public spaces. And as a result, you get a lot more than, let's say, just esoteric texts about metaphysical questions. You get really a sense of the day-to-day anxieties, the opportunities. The first time he he's setting up this center in Waziristan in the 1950s, and the day-to-day issues that he actually faced and the various groups that actually came and supported him. So it's a very rich kind of picture that you get from these sorts of archives.
That's great. I would just also add that in addition to the information Waleed has given, we do have specific parameters from MEAP to focus primarily on 20th and 21st century materials. Though they have been very lenient with us and giving us opportunities to digitize some 19th century materials as well. But I would say in terms of just basic genres and printing standards, like as Waleed has mentioned, the particular genres, but we're also seeing a lot of lithographs, a lot of handwritten letters, some more recently published materials that are published by the Khanaqahs themselves. And I see that Sumaya Ahmed has asked a question that we can talk about intellectual rights as well and who's responsible, and additionally to that. But basically, I would say that it's really the languages. I would say really, correct me if I'm wrong. I would say majority are about Pashto, and some of the older material is Urdu, but it's really the generic conventions, right? We see a lot of Persian poetry, a lot of jurisprudence in Arabic, but I would say it's a pretty mixed bag of where our metadata sheet that we have now, I think we're seeing about 40 to 50% split between Urdu and Pashto, and then maybe 20% Persian, 20% Arabic.
Okay, thank you. So going to our questions in the chat from Kendra Moyer. Do you have contact information for people interested in contributing? Thanks for something really special today.
Oh, that is contact information of the centers that we're working with?
I believe so.
Yes.
I mean, certainly we'd love to share. We're even in the process of this. There's several people who are interested in working on these areas that have reached out to us, and the first thing we said is, would you be interested in joining our project for the brief period of time that you may be out there?
Okay.
So we can actually send those links to possibly Denise, and maybe we can share to the audience as well. But if anybody wants to contact us, we can put people in touch with Taqi Hassan and Peshawar, who's our lead project coordinator there. And yeah, we would be very thrilled to connect anybody to the team on the ground.
Thank you. Next question from Leila Mustafa. Great job, Dr. Waleed and Dr. Rustin. Can you talk about preservation of the physical collections? Do you know if the collections will be published online as open access?
Willie, I can take this if you prefer.
Sure.
I would say that the state of the physical collections is really, I would say, one of my biggest concerns at the moment, because I think, so first, let me answer the easy part. This material, the copyright owners are the institutions themselves. So we have the Al Amir Trust, which is responsible for the Amir Shah Qadri Library, and anything that has been published through that publishing house affiliated with the Amir Shah Qadri Library or the Al Amir Trust. They have given us copyright for not just digitization, but to make it open access. I would say the same, the copyright owners for the materials related to Abdullah Jan Farouqi is the descendant, Wahidullah Jan Farouqi, who is, I believe, the current, I believe is also, Waleed, correct me if I'm wrong, it's him and his brother his brother is currently the sheikh who is given us, yes, given us access and agreed to digitize and make open access that material. So, and I would say that the physical conditions, it's really site dependent. I would say Amir Shah Qadri Library has pretty good preservation methods and have stored materials in a pretty climate, I would say mostly climate controlled environment. whereas the material from Waziristan and Tana is in a little bit more rough shape, not just in terms of storage, but really, as I mentioned, dispersal. And while we would have loved to provide resources and financial resources and equipment for conservation, really the scope of the grant sadly doesn't really cover funding for that. I assume probably because of the expense. So I think that we're really hoping that this digitization project and also this sort of method that we're trying to get people interested in the collection will allow at least for a next step in terms of funding to be one of conservation and preservation. And then I don't know if did I answer the entire question, but basically, yes, we do have the physical materials. Hopefully, as they're getting prepared for digitization, they are either going back into the condition of the Amir Shah Qadri Library, but also for the Waziristan and Tana materials are going to be more properly stored.
Okay, thank you. I think we can take a couple more questions before that we'll need to end. Sumaya Ahmed writes, how capable are the people with whom you worked to do long-term stewardship of the digital objects? Post-custodial implies that the archivists have intellectual control, if not physical. Who would that be in this context?
I think that, sure, I tried to answer a little bit more about that in terms of the question of intellectual copyright. But it is really the UCLA library is very, very interested in making sure that anything that is digitized, we have the proper permissions. So in terms of, nothing that is kind of legally questionable within Pakistan copyright law, or even materials that should not necessarily be published due to family conflicts or things. We have also identified materials that, while we would think have historical value, due to the sensitive nature, we have set aside for not to be digitized. So sensitive material obviously will not be digitized. But I would say yes, the people that were working on the ground are incredibly capable of managing the collection thus far, though I do think that with future help and financial assistance, we can really help with long-term stewardship in terms of physical preservation. But in terms of data management and in terms of having the items be made available, the Amir Shah Qadri Library and the Al Amir Trust, we have plenty of people working in library sciences, as well as the IT and technical fields, that they are able to at least make that material sort of stand the test of time, at least for items that are made digital.
Yeah, on the technical side, the Amir Shah Qadri Library is phenomenal. I mean, they're also 1 degree separation from the Peshawar archives. One person in their network was actually an archivist with Peshawar University for a while, who then joined us. So they, and again, the Sufi Sheikh who is presiding over that institution, really, as well as several other people who are managing it, are all generally have in fact, a lot of interest in the material. They know the material inside and out. So it's certainly not a kind of collection where someone's just sort of hoarding something for generations and feel it only has sort of sacred value and should be touched once a year. Certainly the librarian there, again, I think we're full of praises for what he's capable of, and sort of never ceases to amaze us.
Thank you. So we'll take one last question. From Sylvia Wu, thank you for the excellent presentation. I wonder if you've encountered situations where making the materials public/open access might expose the materials or the community to certain insecurities. If so, what kind of sensitivity or suggestions do you have? I'm thinking about Muslim communities under duress and political systems that might endanger their historical materials, but at the same time make the community members extremely cautious of external investigators.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question we actually have had, we have and continue to have lengthy discussions with everyone who we're working with. So I'll give you one example. land records are phenomenal historical sources and often if there's a court case, then someone will sort of bring together land records for the last sort of 80 years. And there were a couple of cases like that we encountered where I think, collectively we all sat down and said, okay, well, what are the what are the stakes? Are we dealing with land mafias who could actually, use this to their advantage? We even had a run-in, Rustin, with land mafias who were sitting on a late 18th century marble tombstone from Central Asia in this little alleyway in Peshawar. Kind of co-opted them by taking their oral histories, which was kind of fascinating. So in that case, in the case of these land records, we actually went paper by paper and we determined which are sort of more distant historical sources that could actually be useful for researchers and which are more living documents that may not be that. The advantage is that the majority of the material that we are working with, I mean, we do have material in the 2000s, but it's sort of ending in the 1990s. So a lot of the players will, no longer be that active. If we're talking about clashes that are happening, there has, at least in that area, there has been a pretty systematic purge of the Pakistan Taliban, which has actually led to a lot more people feeling comfortable, I think, with in fact, more printing houses set up in Sufi centers, I think, post Taliban than sort of ever before, because I think there's also a bit of a backlash. So, so I guess the short answer to the question is, yes, it is a very important concern. On the other hand, the communities are a lot more secure than they were a few years ago. And there are, alliances that are, I think, between a lot of these communities that are making them sort of hopefully more secure as time goes on.
And just to add a quick little note is that in addition to some of the more politically sensitive material, there are religiously sensitive materials that we do not touch. So for example, things that are considered esoteric or important to the spiritual life of the Khanaqah, that is not meant for outsiders. These we work with members of the Khanaqah throughout the entire process, from digitization to surveying the collection to uploading material. So anything that even before it ends up on the digitization rig, we know what has the approval of the members of the Khanaqah or not. So I would say, like, for example, one of the most beautiful shajaras I've ever seen, which really was a beautiful work of art, in addition to sort of a institutional history of the Khanaqah. They were like, no, this is our personal private information, and it is not it's not for the public. And so obviously
this was actually a particular Hanukkah that was led by 4 generations of women from the 1830s onwards. And there's one text actually that they had with this gorgeous shajara, and they had specifically said that, some of the most beautiful pages we were not to actually copy and share. But, we of course have to respect the sensitivities. It is, after all, the community who's leading the project.
Well, thank you very much again, both to Rustin and Waleed. This was a absolutely fabulous lecture, such an interesting project that you're working on, such a valuable project. Thanks to everyone for coming. For our next lecture on January 25th, we'll be hosting Dr. Josh Mugler to discuss the work of the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library in preserving the manuscript heritage of communities around the world. Information about that will be sent out after the new year. And just as a reminder again, please do donate to our GoFundMe campaign if you would like the series to continue. Thanks so much, and we hope to see you again in the new year. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
So much for having us.